friends. It's your Chapo. We're back again. With me today is Matt, Felix, and Amber. We do have a guest, but I will introduce them by way of bringing up the fact that, now it's a pretty crazy time here in America. We are, on the road to accounting for half of the global death toll of COVID. We are coming up on a presidential election that offers really choice between despair and more despair. Just two different competing brands of senility, offering a brave new future for us here in America. And when things get bad in America, we often look to the north. We look to the friendly country on our northern border as holding out hope for some respite from the nightmare that takes place in our 50 states. And I guess what I'm saying is, even if you wanted to visit Canada, which you can't now as an American because you are now banned from the government of Canada from crossing the border, what I'm saying is, don't start building that Great Escape Tunnel to Montreal just yet. You may want to get on that motorcycle, just crank it up, try to jump over the border into one of the Canadian provinces, but maybe hold off on that, because Canada is a country with a very unique history, and one not too different from that of our own country. And by that I mean it has a veneer of polite liberal society that papers over just the raw extraction industries. What else? Let's see. Neo-Nazis, insane deep state connected mass shootings, the genocide of indigenous people, and a ton of other bizarre occult shit.
Canada shakes your hand and smiles at you before killing you in a Gladio plot.
Okay, but maple syrup. Just putting it out there.
Maple syrup's okay. Gravy on French fries, though. Now we're talking.
You got maple syrup in Vermont.
Yeah. No, I go poutine if you're talking Canadian contributions to culture.
So here to help us break down the dark side of the moose-pocked Great Northern Way is our good friend Dan Beckner. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm good. I'm in the operators command and control center in Montreal here, just sweating in my non-air conditioned apartment.
But you have interlacking fields of fire. That's what matters.
That's right. The grid is active.
See, I mean, fuck, Canada, it's hot up there too. It's not just nice and cool and temperate. It's not snowing right now.
Oh, it's oppressively hot. It's sweating like a hog.
Well, Dan, there are so many different avenues that lead you to the dark heart of Canada. But the one I want to begin with is a bit of very, very recent history in Canada that is just really is the most just like a throbbing eye emoji that really does offer, quite a few avenues of inquiry. I'm talking, of course, about the worst mass shooting in Canadian history. Happened just back in April in Nova Scotia. Yeah. And there is so many elements about this case that is baffling, and I guess we should just start with the fact that the official government inquiry into this will now, as has just been announced by the Canadian government, will not be essentially open to the public, or they will issue a report, but there will be no public hearings on the matter. Dan, can you suggest why this might be the case?
I think this might be the case because the non-black pill interpretation is that the RCMP fucked up so bad when this shooting started by not sending out a mass alert, because the shooting, I think it lasted for 10 to 12 hours.
Yeah, it was about 13 hours of a guy's name. His name is Gabriel Wortman, and he spent 13 hours just driving, around Nova Scotia, and he ended up murdering something like 23 people with a variety of guns.
And torching houses, and he did it in a fake police car too.
It's the single most Grand Theft Auto mass shooting in history, I would say.
This might be a weird time for patriotism, but I just feel like we're much more time efficient in our mass shootings. And
that's true.
When they talk about lines for healthcare, no one ever talks about how long it takes to complete a mass shooting. I mean, it's a really inefficient country.
I got things to do.
It's a denser population down there. and the
Yeah.
population centers are denser. But
As are our music festivals.
this is true. I mean, the most fucked up thing about the commission shutting down a public inquiry is one of the people on that commission is the former fucking police chair. Like it's the former police chief of Fredericton. You know, this is one of the people who decided, no, we're not looking into this.
So if you, like you said, like Dan, like there is the non-eye emoji explanation for why any public inquiry into this would be, I mean, just massively embarrassing to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because their response to this was, and not only that, but Wortman himself had been facing many domestic battery charges and weapons charges for which he was never arrested or even interviewed because of.
He'd also tangled with the police as well. Like he confined 2 police officers to his parking lot for improperly parking. Like,
wait, he did a citizen's arrest of police officers for parking in his parking lot.
This guy fucking. It sucks that he killed all those people because he's kind of. I would think he was cool before that.
He sounds pretty American, but
he could be like the governor of New Hampshire. If he didn't kill these people, he could have moved here.
I don't know.
Classic. Am I being detained?
I picture him like bullying like Mounties and their horses. Like that, to me, that's the only police in Canada. I refuse to believe otherwise, and that's that.
Well, okay. Here's another element to this case that suggests something much more sinister. Before doing this shooting that again killed 22 people in Nova Scotia, the shooter withdrew $475,000 in cash from the CIBC Intria, a subsidiary of the chartered bank that handles currency transactions. Now, why is this interesting? I'm reading here from McLean's article about it. It says court documents show Wortman owned a New Brunswick registered company called Berkshire Broman, the legal owner of 2 vehicles, including one of his police replica cars, which he used to do the shooting. Whatever the purpose of that company, there is no public evidence that it would have been able to move large quantities of cash. Wortman also ran his own denturist business, and there is no reason to believe it would also require him to handle that amount of cash. If Wortman was an RCMP informant or agent, it could explain why the force appeared not to take action on complaints about his illegal guns and his assault on his common-law wife. A Mountie familiar with techniques used by the force in undercover operations, but not with details of the investigation into the shooting, says Wortman could not have collected his own money from Brinks as a private citizen. There's no way a civilian can just make an arrangement like that, he said in an interview. So right before doing this insane shooting, he was able to take out almost $500,000 in cash from a Canadian bank, despite not having any indication whatsoever that any, either personally or any of his businesses had that amount of cash on hand. And even if they did, he would not be able to just walk into the bank and leave the same day with $500,000 in cash.
It was a Brinks depot, which is how the RCMP pays criminal informants. Like that's the method they use. And the other sort of Gladio type thing about this is that his neighbor whose name is Peter Griffin.
Freaking sweet.
Holy crap.
Oh, Lois. Oh, God. Holy crap, Lois. Remember when I was part of P2 Masonic Lodge?
His neighbor Peter Griffin just recently did a 7-year stint for drugs and weapon trafficking linked to La Familia, a Mexican drug cartel with links to the Hells Angels.
Oh dear. Do they know what happened? What happened to the cash he withdrew?
Okay, so apparently his family, so Wortman's family, is trying to get it back from the RCMP, or were trying to get it back 3 or 4 weeks ago. So the RCMP have admitted that they do have, he had a gym bag full of cash, and they have it in evidence, but I don't think it's going anywhere.
So he was just shooting people with a gym bag of cash.
Yeah, or they recovered it from his property, maybe. But they have the cash. The RCMP has at least some of the cash, and his family.
Hell yeah, baby, ski-doos all around.
What does the family claim? Oh yeah, those are our loonies that we collected. What do they say? Where do they say the money came from? Or are they commenting on it? Or are they just oh yeah, we forgot we had that. That was ours.
I think it's just his lawyers have made a comment about it, but I don't think they haven't given a reason for trying to get it back from the cops.
I just reading a little further from the McLean's article here. It says a second Mountie who does not know the first one, but who has also been involved in CI operations, also believes that Wertman's ability to withdraw a large sum of money from the Brinks is an indication that Wertman had a link to the police. That's tradecraft, the Mountie said, explaining that by going through CIBC Intria, the RCMP could avoid typical banking scrutiny as there are no holds placed on the money. Quote, that's what we do when we need flash money for a buy. We don't keep stashes of money around the office. When we suddenly need a large sum of money to make or buy something, that's the route we take. I think with the Brinks transaction, you've proved with that single fact that he had a relationship with the police. He was either a CI or an agent. And like, you know, this you know, when I was just thinking about this, and it's just like this is another mass shooting that seemingly has absolutely no motivation whatsoever. Like there was no manifesto left, and it bears a lot of the hallmarks similar to like the Stephen Paddock shooting, which could
still to this day.
To this day, I mean, like makes absolutely no sense whatsoever in terms of like why someone like Stephen Paddock would do something like that, or like why he was able to take, why he had I guess it makes sense why he would have an arsenal of that size, but just like why he would have that many guns in that hotel room at that time. It's just, I mean, like it could be one or the other. And the other thing that has just happened here in the States recently that is also sort of like eye emoji adjacent, not even adjacent, just connected. But the murder of that federal judge's husband and the shooting of her son in New Jersey. And this was the Judge Solanas, I think her name was just appointed to the a case involving shareholders in Deutsche Bank suing Deutsche Bank over their connections to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the guy who broke into her house dressed as a FedEx agent was a longtime right-wing crank and like men's rights activist.
And former Opie and Anthony guest.
Yes, former Opie.
And Stephen Colbert interviewee.
Yeah.
No shit.
Now, he apparently also had a case before this judge involving, I don't know, like suing Columbia over there.
He was suing to overturn the selective service requirement to only draft mail.
Yeah, the perpetrator or alleged perpetrator, Roy Den Hollander, like he was like a crank lawyer who would like sue bars for having ladies' nights. That was what he was known for like 15 years ago. I mean, it's like that can be used to say like, oh, this is just like a crank who had like some fucking bullshit men's right case against her and clearly had like some conflicts against women. But I will say, I mean, it's not like I know one way or the other right now, but like that was kind of one of the things with P2 and Gladio was that the CIA would use right-wing cranks to kill people.
Yeah.
That were standing in the way of their goals and just go, oh yeah, it was a right-wing crank thing.
Well, and they also, like when they wanted to, say, infiltrate left groups, very frequently found, disgruntled former members of whatever organization that had like an axe to grind. I mean, it helps if they're already pissed off at this person.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, like it's just like the weird thing with cases like these, which like, on the surface, like these spectacular acts of mass murder, which like on the surface, like don't seem to make sense, or you can find like with Roy Den Hollander, like, oh, like there's an Epstein connection. And like, that obviously like that could just be a coincidence or a chimera too. I mean, like, whether it's America or Canada, like not a lot of people need like that much extra motivation to just go fucking insane and start killing people. Yeah. But I mean, certainly with the Nova Scotia case, I mean, like this whole thing with just the cash withdrawal from like a Brinks truck right before he did it, and the fact that they've like, are officially, closing any public inquiry into it would seem to suggest that he was, if not an informant, then like an active asset of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. But I guess like the speculation or question is like, to what end? And I guess like these are, Dan, you spoke about his neighbors' connections between a drug cartel and the Hells Angels, where it's like, like as the source in the McLean's article said, like, look, this is what we do when we need a shitload of cash, like immediately to do like a buy bust or to just put an operation in motion. So again, another example of this is the Boston Marathon bombing. Like, there's a lot of indications that Tamerlane was an FBI informant, and that like he was, basically the FBI facilitated that bombing, or if not facilitated it, like actively aided the Tsarnaevs in.
They covered up a triple murder he likely committed a year before the bombing. That's weird to
That's
do.
right.
And then immediately after the bombing, the two FBI agents went to interview a guy who was connected to all of it, who was Tamerlane's close friend. And during the course of that interview, the guy they were interviewing ended up getting shot in the back of the head, and that's that. So
That's that on that.
My theory on Wortman is that he was going to do a buy bust, probably connected with his neighbor, who's connected with the Hells Angels La Familia conglomerate that is working across Canada. And something went wrong. It got bungled by the local RCMP, and he just lost his shit. And the reason that the RCMP did not, put out basically like a mass alert. Like I've got friends from Nova Scotia who are like, every time there's lightning, my phone goes off. It's like weather alert, be careful, waves, lightning. and I think the reason the RCMP didn't do that is because they had an oh shit moment when they found out he wasn't just killing people. He was in a cop car. He was burning people's houses down. That was the other thing. He was like tying people up, shooting them, and burning their houses down. And like going from small town to small town. And I think they basically didn't want to expose how idiotic this like buy bust thing was.
And that they'd relied on this guy who was clearly on the verge of snapping.
Exactly. Yes. And then with the commission getting shut down, I can't remember the exact wording, but today there was like a briefing, and the reasoning behind it was, we don't want to re-traumatize the victims.
I love that everyone uses that language now.
Wow.
And fucking yesterday, 300 members of victims' families protesting outside of the parliament. We want a public inquiry, and then their response is, "No, we don't want to hurt you."
Yeah, you don't understand how triggering an inquiry could possibly be.
I love that. Like, if like fucking James Jesus Angleton was alive today, he would accuse his critics of Orientalism.
Wow, you're despacing a Latinx named individual.
Yeah.
It's James Jesus Angleton, actually.
Yeah. Felix Rodriguez would have a field day in front of the...
Oh, God,
yeah. He would accuse John Kerry of being a brocialist back during the last good thing that John Kerry did.
Oh, man, I'm imagining the good faith accusations of anti-Semitism lobbed by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the thread with all of these horrific cases is like, whether... Like you said, the Roy Den Hollander thing, Felix, like it could very well be like what it appears on the surface, a right-wing crank doing what right-wing cranks what a small percentage of them invariably end up doing, which is killing a bunch of people because of ladies' nights at bars.
Right.
Or like it needn't, but it's very easy to just think like, yes, it's that, but also the fact that, like you said, right-wing cranks make the perfect shooters for some other kind of operation, or if they're being set up by their handlers, then like I just think the common denominator is that there is really no person on earth more dangerous than like the asset or like informant for a federal law enforcement agency, because they are essentially given carte blanche to commit crimes. They're not just that like their crimes will be covered up, but they'll be actively facilitated by the law enforcement agencies they're working for. And then when they feel like they're burned by, their handlers or whatever, they end up killing, dozens of people. Or like with the Stephen Paddock shooting, I know that the conspiracy angle on that is that it was all some kind of arms deal with like the Saudis gone wrong. But then again, like that begs the question, like, why shoot 600 people to cover it up?
Yeah. And also like, why would the Saudis possibly need to like buy small arms from like a single private dealer? Like,
It doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm obsessed with the Paddock thing, and I don't even have like 20% of a thing I can believe. I mean, like JFK. I mean, we have our own personal theory about JFK that it's sort of similar to our explanation for this case, which is like it's an op that got out of hand, and then everything after it is like, oh fuck.
Yeah.
We killed the president. Oh fuck. Cover it up. But everyone surrounding the JFK case who was like discarded, and take that as you will, was like it just littered with like right wing cranks that the CIA or
Dave
whoever.
Ferry.
Yeah, it was just like,
Oh my God.
all right, you have stomach cancer now.
All the
You're
Cuban
gonna die
exiles,
now.
Eladio,
All right,
Del
see-
Valle, all
Yeah.
those dudes.
All right, see you, you little freak.
I mean, if the CIA is bad at doing this kind of operation and, exposes themselves all the time, the RCMP are 1,000 times worse. They're
Amateur hour.
bumbling. They've been busted. There was an indigenous standoff in Gustafson Lake where the RCMP got busted planting fucking IEDs.
Oh my God! I did not know that one.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, and a similar case where the RCMP were employed by oil companies to discredit and eventually try and maim people who are trying to sue said oil companies for poisoning their farmland. So, every time they try some shit like this, it just falls apart in their hands.
Do they even have horses anymore, by the way? Are they even mounted in any way?
Yeah, I mean, you'll see Mounties sometimes. I've seen Mounties at the Lester B. Pearson Airport in Toronto.
If they're not all on horses, they have to change the name. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I want a Dudley Do-Right-Ass Mountie or nothing.
Yeah, you have to wear the red outfits at all times and get everywhere by horse.
That's right. And
Don't get to tack up like a fucking dumbass with, oh, look at my ballistic plate. No, fuck you. You wear a big dumb hat and a red jacket.
Horsey, bright red outfit, completely sort of innocuous kind of goofy demeanor. That's what I want in a Mountie.
Yeah, strapping, tall.
Talking about the JFK shit and our cousin podcast TrueAnon's budding obsession with Operation Gladio in Europe. It's like, well, why is it that intelligence agencies from their very inception seem to have been intimately connected with criminal organizations and violent right-wing psychopaths? And the answer is A, they're very good and have no moral qualms about torturing and killing people. But two, their beliefs are essentially the same. They are overwhelmingly violent right-wing organizations that despise the left. And then, and then if you're not talking about criminal organizations like the mafia or drug cartels or, paramilitaries or whatever, just individual psychos as well are very useful because they essentially believe all the same things as well. Like this guy Wertman had been pretending to be a cop for years and had apparently had like you said, arrested cops for being in his parking lot, but essentially wanted to be a cop, but was constantly at war with them because he didn't respect them, because he didn't regard them as being as smart or good at being a cop as he was.
That's a specifically dangerous personality.
Yeah.
Yeah, wasn't that a character in Mindhunter?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, all of them.
Dennis Rader was that. Dennis Rader stopped doing home invasion murders after he got a job as a security officer. And he was able to sublimate his homicidal urges through bossing people around. He was notorious for he was like a security guard for a homeowners association or something, and he would just harass people over petty bullshit. There was one woman who he would constantly harass. He threatened to have her dog killed, and she was like, this guy was a nightmare. But I guess for her, it's better that he did that rather than fucking came into her house and strangled her to death.
Yeah, man.
That was where he got off. That's how he was able to get off.
Yeah, that's problem solved. That's a harm reduction. Just give them power. They'll be fine.
Yeah, they'll be fine. No problem there. It's like capitalism and the deep state expression of it recruits people who have a certain authoritarian mindset. But then there are some people who have the right mindset, but they're just not emotionally stable enough. And you can't assimilate those into your formal networks, your police officers and your prison guards and stuff, but they sure make handy freelancers.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is and the mafia as well has often used mentally unstable individuals to carry out murders that are seemingly that look like assassinations that look like essentially the act of a lone schizophrenic, lunatic, basically. That
famously, Frank Colombo assassination was that.
Yeah, just the last line from this McLean's article about this giant cash withdrawal is it just says here, but another Mountie says this guy always wanted to be a Mountie. He was acting like a Mountie. He was doing Mountie things. It's clear to me that it's clear to me that something went wrong.
It's Mountie things you wouldn't understand.
Well, I mean, this is like, he says it's clear to me that something went wrong. I mean, this goes back to our conversation with Tom O'Neill about Manson. Is it that something went wrong, or is it that something went right?
Yes. Something went too right and kind of spilled outside of the bucket of being right and splashed around on the community, and now a bunch of people are dead. So.
Well, okay. Well, I mean, that's one aspect of it. But if we widen the aperture here for a moment, and another point of comparison between Canada and America is that, in America we're currently and have been for a while now undergoing this moment of controversy and revision over, should we have so many statues of former Confederate generals and leaders of the KKK in state houses and various public places in across mostly the South of America. And, people are like, well, yeah, let's get rid of these statues. Let's tear them down. Canada is even more insane because you guys have not just one, but several statues to actual fucking Nazis who carried out the Holocaust. And it's seemingly only now are people beginning to be like, hey, is this controversial?
Yeah.
Yeah. Frizzy, this is my biggest shock in the last few years of following Canadian politics online is I never knew this a few years ago, but right sector just completely owns Canada. It's insane. It's fucking insane. I would have never known that.
Yeah, the Anton Pobry lobby.
That's the genius of if you're from an ethnicity, don't come to a big country. You're just going to be subsumed in the morass of melting pot assimilation. Go to a country with a small population in a large number, and boom, you run that shit.
A small, largely ethnically homogenous population. What could go wrong?
Because you're Ukrainian in America, it's Holodomor. It's like, shut the fuck up. Who are you? But when you're a Ukrainian in Canada, you got a much louder voice.
I mean, the sort of Banderites, I guess we'll get into this, but the Banderites in America are way more organized than the Canadian ones. But they have kind of been not assimilated into American culture, but assimilated into the Cold War era ideological deep state, Mm-hmm. Whereas in Canada, they've kind of, that ideological group of Ukrainians has kind of been allowed to spread out both to the left and to the right in a way.
Yeah, and here's the rub about the Nazi memorials and in Canada is that it wouldn't, obviously this never would have happened if they were literally just statues to Himmler or Goebbels or any of the Nazi high command.
That's
but instead it's because it's not the German Nazis per se, just all of their allies in countries like Ukraine who did carry out much of the Holocaust.
Well,
and
I gotta say that the one statue that everyone is talking about right now that has finally brought this issue to the fore is actually a statue for a Nazi division. It's the 14th SS Waffen SS Galician Division.
Okay, yeah,
who were an actual fucking Nazi unit made up of Ukrainians.
It says here it's a centaf honoring members of the SS division of the SS. Sorry, how do you say that, Dan?
I think it's Galician, actually.
Galician division of the Waffen SS, the Nazi Party's military branch, whose long list of war crimes includes the Holocaust.
Yes, genociding
right
Poles.
near the top. Yeah.
The pillar is located in a Ukrainian cemetery in Oakville, Ontario, which is vandalized with the words Nazi War Monument sometime around June 21st. Early in the investigation, the police classified the vandalism as a hate crime, meaning that SS members are the ones who are the victims of hate here. In response to David Pugliese of the Ottawa Citizen, the Halton Regional Police spokesman stated, "This incident occurred to a monument and the graffiti appeared to target an identifiable group. The fact that identifiable group in question is an SS division didn't seem to matter."
That is a fucking tell right there. That okay, we're defining this as a hate crime because someone in the Ukrainian community complained about it, saying that SS 14th Galatian Division equals Ukrainian, that's a tell, you know? That's like you're kind of showing everybody what your ideology is, which is you think that division was good, you know? You think these people are heroes.
So the question is, and I'm reading here from a Nation article about this, and like the question is, like, who built these monuments, and like how come it took Canada so long? Like, it would just essentially welcome them with open arms, and the answer is, this is kind of like a weird, both official and unofficial, like paperclip that happened both in America, but also especially in Canada after World War II, where it says here, basically, the United States and Canada took in thousands of concentration camp guards, SS fighters, and other Nazi collaborators from Ukraine and other nations such as Latvia, which had its own SS division, won it honors today with parades. There are several theories about why the U.S. and Canadian government welcomed these murderers. Some say it's because it helped them fight against the USSR in the Cold War, and indeed, declassified CIA materials admit to it. Others point to where they were used as strike breakers to weaken the resistance of labor movements. Underneath those, a much simpler explanation. American and Canadian elites let in Holocaust perpetrators for the same reason they denied asylum to Jewish refugees on the MS St. Louis who desperately tried to escape the Holocaust only to be rejected at every port of call. Anti-Semitism. So
I like that we got Werner von Braun and those guys, and then Canada's like, yeah, we'll take the guys who murdered like 35 guys for trying to organize a pickle factory in Kiev.
Pretty much.
Take those guys.
There's a sort of, there's a Ukrainian immigrant community that because of the legacy of the Soviet Union regards many of these figures as heroic figures of resistance against Russia and like Soviet domination of Ukraine.
That's right.
And like the thing is, when you get into the apologism for why these monuments are allowed to exist in the first place, much less not be desecrated literally every day because they're a monument to the people who did the Holocaust. It doesn't take long before you start hearing the phrase Judeo-Bolshevism.
Oh yeah, it's at the end of every single argument online with every single like what about argument about, the Soviets did this, the Soviets did that. And I think the reason this statue vandalism thing is, I've been kind of obsessed with this since 2015, 2016, when it came out that our foreign affairs minister's grandfather was the editor of the biggest Nazi propaganda outlet in occupied Poland. Krakowski Vishti.
Okay, all right.
You know what the especially fucked up thing about it is? It was also an imprint on Medium.
Okay, yeah. Dan, you opened up another huge door here, but in case listeners, you may have missed that. The current deputy prime minister, or like shadow deputy prime minister, or deputy prime minister.
Basically shadow prime minister, yeah.
The shadow prime minister and Canada's former foreign secretary, Chrystia Freeland. Her grandfather was one of the premier Nazi propagandists of all time. One of the greatest in the game to ever do Nazi propaganda.
One of the best. So basically this information had been floating around. The Polish government was actively looking for this guy. His name is Michał Chomiak. That's her granddad. And some Canadian communists, this guy Alex Boeckner and his friend, were doing research at the University of Alberta archives and found Chomiak's personal papers, which included copies of fascist papers that he had published in Europe, other fascist papers, and a pretty damning picture of him and Emil Gazner, who was the Nazi in charge of sort of coordinating propaganda in Galicia and occupied Poland. So, like kind of a big dog. Like he went to Nuremberg, I'm pretty sure.
As evil as America is, like I can't imagine this being allowed to just sort of like just skate by here in America if it turned out that like a major figure in either the Republican or the Democratic Party, their grandfather was like intimately connected with like the Third Reich and the Holocaust and their propaganda efforts. I mean, where it gets interesting is Chrystia's response to this is when she was finally sort of like this had come to light. Her response was as such. She says, It's no secret that Russians do not like you and banned you from the country, began the question. Recently, there has been a series of articles in pro-Russia. This is the journalist setting up the softball for her. She says, recently there has been a series of articles in pro-Russian websites about you and your maternal grandparents, making accusations that your grandfather was a Nazi collaborator. I'd like to get your view. Is this a disinformation campaign by the Russians trying to smear and discredit you?
God.
Or, which they have a tendency to do? Friedland replied,
Great journalism.
The dishonesty of the Slavs that we all know and love.
Oh my God.
They are
Friedland
perfidious people.
her response to that very hard-hitting question was, it's public knowledge that there have been efforts, as U.S. intelligence sources have said, by Russia to destabilize the U.S. political system. I think the Canadians and indeed other Western countries should be prepared for similar efforts to be directed at us. I am confident in our country's democracy, and I'm confident that we can stand up to and see through these efforts. I don't think it's a secret, she continued. American officials have publicly said, and even German Chancellor Angela Merkel has publicly said, that there were efforts on the Russian side to destabilize Western democracies, and I don't think it should come as a surprise if these same efforts were used against Canada. Now, here's the thing. I could imagine if this happened in America. Look, obviously, you're not. The sins of the father or the sins of the grandparent should not, pass down to the child. Like if your grandfather was a Nazi, and then you're, had nothing to do with them or didn't really even know them, and essentially living a good and decent life and devoted to public service in whatever country you're in, fine. But when it comes out, this seems like an odd reply. It should just be like, well, yeah, that it's true, and I unequivocally condemn, and I'm ashamed of any association my family, the actions of my family. But this just seems to be the response is just not. She's not denying it, but she's just saying this is Russian.
The information is being weaponized. It's true.
Yeah.
But
I'm trying to remember how Gorka handled any inquiries into his family history, and I want to say that. I think he just sort of lightly touched on it. I don't think he was just he was just they were resisting I don't remember what.
Yeah,
he said.
no, Amber, you're right. Like the Judeo-Bolshevism line of oh, you don't understand what the Bolsheviks did to the Ukraine was so horrible that that I don't know accounts for all the shit they did in World War II. But yeah, what Gorka did was essentially about the Vitezi Rend or whatever, was just to say that this was part of a heroic Hungarian anti-communist movement,
right?
And downplayed everything else that entails. If you're talking
gloriously failed.
a bit of a light touch, yeah.
The Freeland stuff makes a lot more sense, and because of the state of journalism in this country, no one really did this, but it makes more sense when you look at her family history and you realize that, she loved her grandfather. She worked with her grandfather at his newspaper. He had a newspaper in, I believe it was Edmonton. So that's where she first learned to be a journalist.
So he stayed in the journalism business, is what you're saying.
He also had a weird
military
position.
is a great place to learn skills that you can find a career in.
Yeah, exactly. It makes even more sense when you find out that her mother, his daughter, Helena Freeland, who's she ran I think a feminist bookstore in Alberta and was kind of a public liberal. She was involved in rewriting the Ukrainian constitution after the Soviet Union fell apart. And her uncle...
Wow, a real feminazi, an actual feminazi. There she is.
And her uncle Bogdan, worked for USAID, which is, the soft power arm of U.S. intelligence. He worked on a special project which was decollectivizing agricultural land in Ukraine, basically chopping it up and selling it off, privatizing it. So you have a whole family that is essentially carrying out a generational ideological project based around fascist, exterminationist Nazi ideology that has just been passed down, and and they're kind of returning to the homeland. And with Freeland, her version of this is Operation Unifier, which is basically hundreds of millions of Canadian taxpayer dollars poured into the corrupt black hole of Ukraine to forward like kind of a nationalist policy, selling them sniper rifles, training Azov battalion. So that's why her grandfather being a Nazi, Ukrainian nationalist, Banderite matters. And I think it was really hard for the Canadian public to put all of that together in their mind. And what made it even harder was that the journalists that should have been sort of probing into this instead just ran cover for her. So I'm talking about like Jesse Brown from Canada Land. Before it came out that these accusations of her grandfather being a Nazi were true, I messaged him and was like, hey, why don't you guys do a Canada Land episode on Ukrainian fascists in Canada? And he pitched it over to his co-editor, Jane Levednenko, and they made a big joke about it and were like, this is fake news. She was like, I'm Ukrainian, I know this is fake news. So, and then, I think the worst, but the worst culprit in whitewashing this was former Vice editor, and I think he writes for Foreign Affairs now, Justin Ling.
I'm familiar with this guy.
Yeah, so he put a piece out basically claiming that the Russian embassy had approached Vice with some like information about Chrystia Freeland's grandfather, which they chose not to publish because they knew it was like it was supposed to corrode Canadian democracy. And
it's genuinely shocking that like this like former like Gavin McInnes like fashion do's and don'ts like early 2000 hipster website is so fucking responsible for the dissemination of just like Cold War hangover misinformation about like not just like the West but everywhere. It's completely insane when you look at Vice's foreign reporting. And I mean, I'm just saying it makes you wonder.
They're
Because-
I gotta say,
all became
credit where
neocons.
credits due. Credit where credits due. Red Kahina called that one.
Yeah,
At the time.
that's true.
But to be fair,
that's
if you call everything a psyop, eventually you will
Exactly.
be right.
Yeah.
Yes,
This
you
is-
will inevitably
Yeah,
be
that's
correct.
true. That's
That
true.
was one. That was one where she got the daily double.
This
When you're fishing with dynamite.
This fucking broke my mind though. So Ling published this article defending Freeland and dismissing these claims, and then tweeted out that Chomiak's paper was, like many others, anti-Semitic and was censored by the Nazis. That does not make it a Nazi newspaper.
Let's go, dude.
It's like, all right, when you're getting like fucking editorial cues from Emil Gazner and Nazi high command, it's like, so fucking Ling's defense was that Chomiak was forced to do this, and he just like Marvel Universed it. He was like maybe he was sneaking in anti-Nazi propaganda into the propaganda while they're publishing shit like how to recognize a Jew in your neighborhood.
Right.
Fuck you, dude.
Yeah. He put like an acrostic in the article about identifying Jews by the shape of their eyes.
Look,
that was like resist
ju-
Hitler.
Just because my newspaper runs the comic strip Beetle Bailey does not mean that we are an arm of the U.S. military industrial complex. It's just a comic about a buffoonish private and a general who gets horny for his secretary. That's it.
Exactly.
No, I mean, like, you could say, like, he was doing the Kurt Vonnegut Mother Night thing. Like, he was doing Nazi propaganda, but it was all actually secret coded messages to the Allies about how to win the war.
About how to be good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this would culminate for Ling in this psychosis would culminate in him publishing a Maclean's article about how Putin was going to install a Manchurian candidate in Canada.
Why would you bother?
Who gives a shit?
Yeah, well, that
Talk about just a low return investment.
Yeah.
And it's also funny because it would seem like as the details of the story that you've just told us, it would seem to suggest that a Manchurian candidate has been implanted in Canada, but it wasn't the Russia or the former Soviet Union doing it.
Yeah, it was the fucking remnants of the
Nazis.
OUN. It was Banderites. And I don't know. And I think the reason people are engaged in it now is because graffitiing a statue to an SS division is a lot easier to be revulsed by than something that is wrapped in like flak, like that something that's oh, maybe it's a Russian op. You know, there's nothing
Yeah.
to hide behind. It's a statue to an SS division.
Did you say there was also a connection to British intelligence with all of this, as there are if you're talking about
No.
Nazis and the
Yes,
way.
yes, Felix, there is.
No, I don't believe
yeah,
that. I
Yeah,
don't believe
it's
that.
so good. So, my partner Devoika and I were doing some deep research on this yesterday and dug up a whole bunch of wild shit because it had always bothered me. I knew that the Ukrainian community here, back at the turn of the last century through the 1930s, was fairly left. Like, they started something called the Ukrainian Labor Farmer Temple Association, which had like 167 branches across the country, and the UTLFA like also started the first workable public Medicare in this country. Like, before we had Medicare, they had something called the Workers' Benevolent Association, which would provide
It's
provide
like
a
that in New
framework.
York too. It's it's like that in New York too. Like, you have some very, very, very right wing Ukrainian immigrants and descendants of Ukrainian immigrants that are essentially have Cold War hangovers, and then you go to KGB bar, which was literally a social. It was started as a socialist club for Ukrainian immigrants. There's a big tradition of left wing, even Stalinist Soviet Ukrainian social clubs, and then
Yeah.
also there's some Nazis.
Yeah. So in this country, in Canada, that left-wing element was absolutely sidelined. And in some cases, like a lot of cases, their halls, the labor halls, their temples, the places they met, were appropriated with the help of the state by right-wingers. So, and essentially the way that happened was in 1940, and this is the British spy thing, a man named Tracy Phillips came to visit Canada. He's a former British colonial officer. He worked in the Balkans. His expertise was basically splitting indigenous populations in British colonies between two different groups and pitting them against each other.
Yeah, the classic move is you take the group that had been disadvantaged before colonialism and put them in charge so that they can carry out your will and then also get revenge on the group that they felt were that was oppressing them previously. But it's a brilliant move, and you see it play out across all kinds of European imperialism throughout across the centuries.
Exactly. So he's in the country and he is doing a cross-Canada tour talking to diaspora communities to basically check the temperature for, publicly it's to sort of make a bridge to these diaspora communities. But what he's really doing is working for British and Canadian intelligence, finding out who's a fucking socialist and who's not. And he focuses on the Ukrainian community and realizes that most of the community is left. It leans pretty far left. If they haven't been assimilated, they're pretty far left. So he helps the Canadian government start something called the UCC, which is like the body that kind of represents the diaspora now and excludes all of the leftists. So does not let socialists join the thing that will represent Ukrainians in Canada, and packs it with right-wingers, packs it with people from the clergy, and then eventually it gets packed with SS 14th Galatian Division members. So erases the leftists' contribution and voice in the Ukrainian diaspora. And this guy was like a virulent anti-communist, and he succeeded. And then the people they brought in post-war from these displaced person camps acted as strikebreakers and community leaders, and they were mostly like bourgeois, a lot of them, compared to the first wave of immigrants. The first wave of immigrants were farmers. These guys, like a lot of fascists, are from the bourgeois, so they easily manipulated and dominated the diaspora.
And this is a story that's repeated throughout Europe and America after World War II. It's just like as soon as the Nazis were defeated, like the enemy became the Soviet Union. It became Bolshevism, which is what, Churchill and much of the leaders of the West wanted to fight to begin with. What they always regarded as the real enemy. And then, like, they were almost like disappointed that they had to fight Hitler to begin with, like that they couldn't make that work. Yeah. And then, like, after World War II, I mean, the fight against, it didn't happen immediately, but like certainly in terms of like the OSS and what would become the CIA, this was their goal all along, was to fight the next war. And then like in doing so, it involved absorbing much of, like, if not Nazi leadership, then like Nazi affiliated groups in those countries to be the kind of the tip of the spear to wage war against the left in what were now essentially democracies, right? That
That's right.
We at the ballot box or in trade unions and otherwise, and lo and behold, what that involves is employing people who, as we talked about at the very beginning of the show, are all violent, right-wing, psychopathic mass murderers that occasionally spill over into, fantastic acts of public violence, be they assassination, mass murders, bombings, kidnappings, things like that seem like they're like, oh, this has gotten out of hand, but are really just the template for how to wage war on the left in the Cold War paradigm.
Yep. And internally and if you want to purge a diaspora of left-leaning politics, the best way you can do is put a bunch of violent psychos in it. Like, just you've got a Yugoslavian diaspora that's causing problems. Just ship in some Ustache. Like.
Moving on here, just wrapping up here. We have some quick hits about a few other fun details about Canadian history. Now, Matt, you brought up something that I and I don't think even Dan was aware of, about the Canadian leader during World War II, Mackenzie King, because Canada was
William Lyon Mackenzie King, the Liberal Prime
Canada
Minister
was a big part of the Allied effort. They were a big part of D-Day. Many Canadian soldiers served and died in World War II in the Western Front. The leader of Canada during that time was a guy named Mackenzie King.
And he after he died, no one knew it at the time, but after he died and his diaries were revealed, it came out that he was heavily into the occult, specifically paying mediums to do seances where he communed with people. The people he communed with included Da Vinci, his parents and grandparents, some of his dead dogs from his past, and FDR.
I was totally unaware of this.
Yeah.
So wait, I assume he had contact with the actual FDR while he was alive, but then right after he died, he was
which one to talk to.
Yeah, right after he died, he
knew which medium was serious.
So like right after he died, he just kept the conversation going through a medium.
Yeah,
there you go. And then another similarity with America is a spate of satanic panic surrounding Vancouver Island that had to do with the game Dungeons and Dragons. When did this take place, Dan?
This would have started in 1980 with the publication of a book called Michelle Remembers by Lawrence Pazder, and he co-wrote it with the subject of the book, Michelle Smith, who he married. So
that sounds really healthy. That's definitely That's a good ethical collaborative relationship.
No, I'm not grooming her. I de-groomed her. After the Satanist groomed her. Yeah. It's actually the opposite of grooming.
So the book is purports to be her experiences that he has pulled out of her mind with regressive hypnotherapy.
Right. Not a thing.
Which is totally not a thing. And it's just basically like one horror after the other. It's a very, it's the story of like a young girl who's being sexually and emotionally abused by Satanists and eventually by Satan himself. So,
yeah. Come on. You're telling me it was Satan himself and not one of the lesser dukes of hell, like Baphomet, Azazel, things like that. Or just
Baphomet is such a scumbag. Like, he's always like, if you want to meet Satan, you have to blow me.
And this is why we can't have Burger Records anymore.
Mm-hmm. He's basically like a really sleazy roadie.
Well, yeah, that's why Varg doesn't talk to him anymore.
The split.
That's why he worships like Norse forest gods instead.
Gentlemen who respect women.
Yeah, exactly. Norse forest gods are actually really nice. They're like really humble.
Right, and I mean, there's something to the traditional kind of sort of chivalrous idea of it. Like there is a place for women in that worldview, and they get to wear those metal bikini tops. I understand, so it's great.
Or if
Those are pretty cool.
Or if you're talking about the Greek pantheon, it's like, look, if you want to have sex with a human woman, just like be normal, act normal, and just appear before her as a swan.
Yeah.
Yes. Simple.
So this was all based around Vancouver Island, and like,
Yeah.
so how did Dungeons and Dragons get involved in it?
So
'Cause that was like
basically, the whole thing was purportedly happened in Victoria, and then people like my mom and everyone she knew were like, "Oh, Victoria is the world capital of Satanism," which is something that you'll hear occasionally, floating around to people who are interested in the occult. It later came out like obviously this whole thing was completely made up, right? And it was almost like kind of like a weird sex fantasy thing that they had going with each other that became a bestseller. Michelle,
Again,
and
like I
I
said, hot. By the way, there's really good journalism about this from a woman called Debbie Nathan, who was a feminist working for a feminist editor, and she covered the Satanic Panic shit and was like, this stuff is all made up. They're throwing gay people, poor people, people who live in trailers, immigrants in jail over like the fact that 4-year-olds don't know the difference between real and fantasy. And she was summarily like blacklisted from like everything, like both right wingers and like feminists like Gloria Steinem. And
speaking of CIA, Gloria Steinem. Like speaking of fucking, not really. Like
element. It's on her like resume. It's not even like
she's proud of it. She's expressed
the Satanic Panic stuff. Like anyone who tried to like in good faith investigate that stuff was just, there was this unholy sort of marriage between like feminists and extreme right wing, like, Tipper Gore moms who would just work to destroy their fucking career. And it was like traumatizing for them. Anyway, so justice for Debbie Nathan.
This is the climate. And it kind of resulted in...
A good rule of thumb is that recovered memories that are given to you by a therapist through hypnosis is hokum.
Especially if he recovered them with his dick.
Yeah, so they banned fantasy novels, science fiction novels, and Dungeons and Dragons in my public school district for years. Years and years and years.
Do you remember some of the sci-fi books that made the ban list?
Yeah, it was just basically anything that was science fiction. So, like, at the time, I guess it would have been, like, Larry Niven's, like, Man Kazin Wars, or, like, just... anything like the Wing Commander novelizations,
the novelization of the computer game Wing Commander.
Yeah.
Could you read like Gene Wolfe? I mean, he was Catholic. I don't know if they considered like Catholics also a form of witchcraft.
I think it was
varying opinions on that.
It was a blanket ban, but my friends and I were pretty bummed that
that does suck.
Yeah, like being a nerd and not having access to the wellspring of nerddom, like
it's amazing you didn't have like more mass shootings in Canada before this.
Yeah, it's true. Well, it was just our school district, so who knows? Maybe Couch and Lake is a hotbed of potential shooters. Well,
all of this, be it in Canada and America, and the Dungeons and Dragons connection to Satanism, occult, and mass murder. This, of course, would go on to be brilliantly dramatized in the CW teen TV show Riverdale. Speaking of season 3, especially, Griffins and Gargoyles is just about the best fictional depiction of satanic murder connected to a role-playing game that you are come across. I will eventually be investigating the TV show Riverdale much, much deeper. Dark Jughead, everybody.
In case you haven't noticed, I'm weird.
Dan, I want to thank you so much for coming on and just sort of giving us a sort of keyhole glimpse into the dark history and background of our wonderful neighbors to the north. But before you go, I mean, I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned, you alluded to it briefly, but like, you are a touring musician by trade, and that has been wiped out entirely by this COVID shit. And I'm just wondering, like, how are you getting by? How is your band getting by? How are other musicians dealing with this right now? Because I mean, like, you can't. No venues are open. Many venues are closing. Like long-standing music and performance spaces are now all going under. And the idea that you make a living getting people into closed areas, breathing the same air, and there's no indication that that's going to come back anytime soon. Yeah,
it's all over. So basically, none of the bands are making any money. And that touring is 100% like it is the main source of income for any musician. Like, no one really makes money off of streaming. Licensing is like a third of what it was even 5 years ago. So the way I'm making money right now is that Devoika and I started a Patreon called Biblioteca. That's basically a platform for us to put out operators demos, which is my other band. Put out, like, do live streams. I've got a thing where I just sit around and listen to records and talk to people. And that's been good, but please subscribe to our Patreon, because that's how we're making money. So that's how we're surviving.
That is the answer. It's just, COVID is making everyone a podcaster. Everyone's getting in on that Patreon model. But
what we're saying, Dan, is that we're going to have to break your legs. Sorry, this is our gig, and you can't muscle in on this shit.
No podcasting yet, but definitely like live streaming stuff. Yeah.
Make sure it stays that way.
Well, we'll have the link to